Alright, let's get this show on the road. Hi, my name is and today we're going to talk about how to build a robust society with a little help from a few of our deadest friends. Now, my starting point for this adventure was a novel called Looking Backward, written by Edward Bellamy in 1887. Bellamy wrote Looking Backward to outline his idea for a socialist utopia, and it was very popular in the US and in England. Then, an English dude named William Morris wrote a review of Looking Backward, saying, basically,
"Cool book, but you don't speak for all of us socialists, and here are some things I disagree on."
And then Morris wrote a knockoff version of Bellamy's book called News from Nowhere as a sort of response to Bellamy's premise and to highlight his own views. And then Bellamy wrote a review on that. And then like 60 years later, a behavioral psychologist and social philosopher named B.F. Skinner wrote a book on all this socialist fiction and some of his own thoughts called Walden 2. And everyone lost their minds about that for a while, and some people in the farmlands by Charlottesville, Virginia even modeled a community after it that's still running and will give you tours on Saturdays for $5.
A lot of people come here looking for Utopia.
And then in the mid-20th century, Ursula K. Le Guin absolutely sent it with some soft science fiction works of her own. And there's been some great stuff before and after and in between, and check it out if you want, because it's all super interesting. But despite the fact that there are alternative models proposed by other visionaries, we're going to stick with Bellamy's book as our socialist champion for today. In Looking Backward, our protagonist Julian West describes going to sleep an upper-class young man in 1887 Boston and waking up in the year 2000 to a socialist utopia in the home of kind and welcoming hosts. The rest of this book is this nice family, a physician, his wife, and their beautiful daughter, who definitely isn't Julian's soulmate across time, talking with Julian, comparing notes on how they understand society and explaining how things changed so much in just a couple centuries. Occasionally, they stop to ask Julian, in small, earnest voices,
"What were you people thinking in
the 19th century?
How could you ever think poverty was okay?"
To which Julian has to reply, basically,
"Oh, I don't know, we just thought it had to be like that, I guess."
Side note, this book was an absolute delight to read, and it reads like a fanfic written by a Gen Z high schooler in 2017. Highly recommended. Plunging ahead. Here is how Bellamy's socialist utopia, the world in which Julian West wakes up, works. America has a centralized government that plans and delegates the entire workforce. From the age of 21 to 45, every citizen must serve society in a position created by the state. Wages are the same for everyone. Doctors do not earn more than custodians. What changes is the hours worked and the conditions of the labor. The state gives everyone the same amount of credit, their version of money, and then adjusts labor such that each position is appealing. For example, a particularly brutal job might only require 1 hour of work instead of 8. At 46, you're off the clock, you become eligible to vote on matters concerning the field in which you served, and you are cared for by society for the rest of your life. Once this system is established, the rest of Bellamy's society seems to fall into place. It's a socialist dream. No human energy is wasted in fruitless competition. There is no confusion or disparity in the cost of any good or service because cost is regulated by the state. The organization of society into one unified workforce eliminates most sources of economic inefficiency, hence the reduction in how long a citizen must work and how hard. Poverty is dead. Every industry is unified and staffed by specialized workers who excel in that field, and labor is a cherished opportunity to build national pride without going to war. Life is good. So first and foremost, any libertarian worth their weight in decentralized currency should be quick to object to a government that decides where you can work and how, and especially to one that prevents you from exchanging your personal credits for a service from your neighbor without state intervention, even if you both consent to the transaction. And they're right, it's kind of sketchy. Bellamy does begin to address this, and in the interest of attacking a framework on its strong side, we won't discount him for not finishing it. So in his model, the state doesn't actually really tell you what job you work. Citizens are provided with enriching education that exposes them to a little bit of all topics in hopes that they'll find one they're passionate about. When a student comes of age, they are presumed to have some idea of what field they want to serve in. They tell the state, and the state puts them in that industry. Easy, what could possibly go wrong? Overlooking the assumption that everyone knows what they're good at, there's a bigger threat in the assumption that the state is benevolent. Bellamy goes into significant detail about the process of electing state officials. He describes checks and balances, who gets to vote for which positions, differences in term lengths, how the freedom of the press is preserved, industry-specific councils made of previous members of that section of the workforce, the hierarchy of councils leading up to the president, the whole shebang. Cool, fine, whatever. What really makes all these checks sufficient is the belief that each human cog in the machine is rational, law-abiding, and wants to do what's best for themselves, and therefore for the society that supports them. The checks prevent bias, not malice. Like many socialists, Bellamy holds that cooperation and goodness are common in human nature already, and will be especially common in a society that fosters teamwork and empathy instead of like a capitalist hellscape that encourages selfishness and conniving competition. for example. And this is a good point. It doesn't change the fact, though, that if the state were to become corrupt, temporarily overlooking how, the system must be resilient enough to win out over it. Bellamy's argument that humans act better when the state cares for them is important, and it can totally affect how we shape society. However, it doesn't negate the need for security against bad apples. The libertarians and the socialists and the capitalists can argue all they want about what they're willing to sacrifice for the perfect society, but first we have to make sure this perfect society would even be able to survive. If it's not robust, it doesn't matter what you give up to keep it, because there's no guarantee it could even keep itself. You don't necessarily have to plan for a society of evil, selfish monsters, but you also can't afford to assume that everyone's going to do what they're supposed to do all the time, no matter how well you raise them. So how do you check? How can you investigate the robustness of a system that only exists in theory? To test for weak points in our model, I propose we subject it to a kind of penetration testing that I'm going to call the Goblin test. Here's how it works. Imagine the society you want, how it's structured, how it runs, and then imagine that one of the people in power is an absolute goblin, a monster, a force of chaotic evil, an entity that wants nothing except for the downfall of society, the suffering of citizens, the blood of the innocent. The goblin can't be appeased. The goblin does not want money or love or joy. The goblin doesn't even want to prolong his own life. The goblin only wishes to wreak havoc. How does your society fare? Let's play. Scenario 1. The goblin is the president of our socialist utopia. Everyone thinks he's a good, kind man and a brilliant genius as well. He is, in fact, the goblin. After gaining the trust of his team, he bypasses the levels of authority underneath him and directly commands all the laborers in charge of food to stop working. He tells them that technology has evolved such that their services are obsolete and they can either
choose another industry or retire early.
He is compelling, and they are content. He speaks directly to the laborers that store food. He tells them that it's poisoned and to get rid of it. Why are you telling us this, boss? Usually it's the manager giving us orders.
There's no time, friends. It's a matter of national security. We have to dump the tainted food before it spreads to the fresh additions. We have to move fast. The country's counting on you. And hey, good work out there.
He is compelling, and they comply. The council beneath the president that usually monitors labor sees this order and complains. Now this is good. Bellamy has introduced this council as a check. But can the president override them? Can he act too quickly to be stopped? Can he execute them? Can he convince them that he's right? Bellamy didn't say. The gaps in Bellamy's framework were filled by the concrete good of humanity. He didn't believe a goblin could become the president. People never do. In any of these cases, the food is gone, the country starves, and society collapses. Game over. Scenario 2. The president is a sweetheart. The goblin is someone who, under capitalism, would be extremely wealthy. He's skilled, he's efficient, he's an industrial god. Can he gain enough power to burn the world under Bellamy's utopia? Well, not really. He can't accumulate more wealth than anyone else. He can just work less. Even if, for whatever reason, he could, the citizens of this society aren't desperate for or vulnerable to manipulation by wealth. The goblin can't bribe anyone for anything because 1, nobody else wants his money, and 2, neither he nor the people he's bribing have the means to do much of anything without the state. What's he gonna do, stop food production? He doesn't have that power. Poison the water? Fine. Maybe he chooses to work in the water industry. Maybe he procures poison. First of all, not clear he can get poison of the kind or quantity that would take a society down.
Poison, huh? We don't give that to the grocery stores. Well, sure, we make it, but we give it straight to the euthanasia team. Are you part of that? Why aren't you on record? Hey, pal, are you trying to hurt someone? Maybe you ought to visit the doctor.
Oh my god. But assuming he could, then what? He dumps it in one of the central water systems? Okay, then the people who monitor water safety catch it. They purify it. There's backup water. It's not like he can develop a hyper-effective poison on his own. The labs belong to industries he's not a part of. Each of these public safety tasks are managed by different teams because they're different jobs requiring different skills. The goblin is one man. He can't work in all these parts of the system. If the goblin is an ordinary civilian, he might be able to hurt people, but he can't end the society. He loses. So, what did we learn? Bellamy's society protects against goblin behavior by individual citizens, but is vulnerable to an attack by a high-ranking member of the state. This is interesting. What does this mean? We don't know. To compare, let's look at another proposed utopia, Adam Smith's capitalism. The rules of Smith's game are as follows. Private property exists and is protected by the state. Individuals compete and exchange with each other for personal gain. The government does not do more than 3 things. These 3 things are 1. National defense against foreign threats. 2. Law and order among citizens. And 3. Building and maintaining public institutions that everyone benefits from, but no one self-interested person or company would be compelled to make themselves. Other than that, the government laissez-faires right off and lets the people do their thing. Together, the self-interest of each person, through the magic of the free market and specialization of labor, ensures the best outcome for everyone while keeping the machine moving. You are free to create what you want. You are free to buy anything that someone else in the world is willing to make. You're responsible for pursuing only your own happiness, and in doing so, you're already doing your part to help the rest fall into place. Your coffee is imported, your shirt is soft, your money belongs to you. You're free. Life is good. Now, this dream gets a bad rap in a liberal arts college like mine, because the mythology behind it is strikingly similar to the mythology behind our current system. And in our current system, one major injury can leave you homeless. In our system, certain communities are neglected and tormented and then fucking incarcerated for the illegal drugs they turn to in the absence of state-issued help. Your access to food, clean water, education, housing, and even medical care is often arbitrarily and inefficiently assigned through the conniving lie that we're a meritocracy. And yeah, a system like this makes the invisible hand in all its idealistic glory look pretty weak to heartbroken Gen Z college students whose families are paying 5 times more than an attempt on my life costs just to take some classes and experience a community. But to be fair and to be clear, we're not living the society Smith proposed. We've gone rogue. Smith had no idea we'd be able to privatize things like medicine and education to the degree that we have, and there's actually nothing in the model of the invisible hand dream that prohibits universal health care and similar public institutions. The fact that the government shouldn't control these institutions in no way means that they can't provide them, right? So in an actual Smith-style utopia, we again get to ask, does it pass the Goblin test? Let's play. Scenario 1. The Goblin is the president. Can he cut off food supply? No, he doesn't have control over it. Well, can he cut off access to medical care for certain citizens? Not really. Anyone that wants a good or service can get it from an individual who's willing to provide it. The government can't stop these interactions. They never coordinated them in the first place. Alright, cool. So far so good, Adam. But hold on, cowboy. He's still the head of state. He's our foreign policy guy. Can he nuke other nations to start a war that kills us all? Maybe. Probably, actually. He can lie. He can convince his nuke council or whatever that enemies are about to nuke us and we have to fire. Now, there's an argument to be made here that self-interest would save the day. Individuals don't just trust the government.
We're not socialists. We're capitalists. Individuals. We look out for ourselves, to the benefit of all.
Smith's citizens wouldn't launch the nukes. They'd check the data, find the truth, override the president to save themselves. However, the self-interest argument goes both ways. If the Goblin were to promise safety, security, and a comparative advantage to the nuke council in exchange for their submission to him, if he could propose a sort of prisoner's dilemma to them, if you don't do it, I'll reward someone who will, and you'll be outside when the bombs drop kind of deal, their self-interest might very well guide them to start this terrible war. We nuke another country, they nuke us back, and society as we know it is blown to smithereens. Game over. Scenario 2. The Goblin is a member of the Senate. What can he do? Well, he can propose corrupt policy. If he's charismatic enough, he can gain support, defund infrastructure, public health, food, water, whatever. First of all, can he? Can he persuade the other members, enough of them, that it's not only in their best interest to vote for these bills, but that it will be discreet enough that they won't be voted out and lose their source of income? Maybe. Let's say that he can. By Smith's logic, this shouldn't actually be too big a threat because private companies will pick up the slack. What the government cannot do well, private entities will be compelled to take over, because self-interest powers the machine. So this is not a game over. The Goblin loses this round. Now this is where things get interesting. Scenario number 3. The Goblin is not an elected official. He's not the president. He's not even a part of the government. In this round, the Goblin is a wealthy capitalist. The government's supposed to break up monopolies and keep some healthy competition in the game, but can our filthy rich Goblin bribe government officials? Can he hire effective lobbyists? Sure. Self-interest compels the lobbyist to provide the service he requests. It compels the legislators to accept bribes to allow themselves to be persuaded. It compels law enforcement to accept money or money-related luxuries in exchange for looking the other way while the Goblin moves his chess pieces, while he accumulates a big bad monopoly within our pristine free market. Once it's established that the Goblin can in fact gain a monopoly in our capitalist utopia, the game can be ended plenty of ways. Let's say the Goblin takes over the majority of the nation's farmland. He pays to have it destroyed. He is able to hire people to carry out this task because he pays a rate that appeals to their sense of self-interest, and because he can lie to them about the end goal of their labor. Labor is specialized and largely unregulated. These employees are only one point on the conveyor belt. They don't even need to be told what they're sowing into the fields, what they're feeding to the livestock.
Hey, boss, what exactly is this stuff anyway? Am I paying you to ask questions? Just spray it on the ground.
Alright, maybe you'd need a better manager than that to get the job done, but you get the picture. Anything for the right price, even poison, even ignorance. All the crops are ruined, and the country can no longer grow food. It doesn't have to be food either. It can be water or electricity or something else that society relies on. But it can be done. The Goblin could be anyone in Adam Smith's society, and he would win as long as he had enough money. Corruption, monopoly. Game over. So what did we learn this time? Smith's society is relatively safe against goblinry and the government, but it's vulnerable to wealthy individuals. It is also vulnerable to high-ranking government officials in the line of national defense specifically if they have enough access to weapons of mass destruction we now know about, even though neither Smith nor Bellamy had these in mind when they were making their models. I think this is where a lot of debates get murky. You get someone on the socialist side saying you capitalists suck because you'd let society be destroyed by any rich monster, and then you get the capitalist side saying you socialists, you communists, y'all are the suckers because you'd really put all your trust in the state, leaving yourself completely vulnerable to goblin behavior in the core. And these are fair points and all, but none of them address the fact that both systems, and most of the ones other people talk about, do not pass the test. There's an argument to be made that some descriptions of capitalism reject poverty just as much as socialism, and that it only fails because it's susceptible to goblin activity. You get into the weeds about which society produces goblins in the first place, and like what percentage of a goblin could take us down versus how much we actually follow one of the models versus how much we've changed since the beginning of its implementation. I don't have time to make this case, but there is a case to be made. I propose that in an ideal society, there should be nowhere where you could put the goblin where he would succeed. The government, the framework, the machine, whatever you want to call it, it should be robust enough to outlive a goblin, regardless of how strongly you feel like one won't come along. And I'll be honest, I don't really know what this system will look like, but you know who had some neat ideas? Thomson. William Thomson, an Irish precursor to Marx born in 1775, seems to be an absolute sweetheart centuries before his time. I honestly don't know why no one's talking about him. He was a feminist, a vegetarian, and a utilitarian who actually followed his beliefs to some of their logical conclusions, a bitterly rare trait among influential economists. In the late 1700s, Jeremy Bentham, a much more famous utilitarian, basically said, like, "Hey guys, we want to maximize happiness, right?
Yeah, we sure do, Jeremy.
What if we took some of the money away from people who only kind of enjoy it and gave it to people who really super need it? That way, maximum utility overall would..."
Hey, Jeremy, what if you shut your commie mouth and let us do the thing we want to do? How about that?
And then Thomson came along and saw the point that Bentham was making and said, "Yeah, Bentham made some good points, but in the end he wasn't right.
Yeah, you got it, man.
Because he didn't take it far enough."
Whoa, slow down, Thompson.
No, the government shouldn't take money away from the rich and give it to the poor.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I like how that sounds.
Because there shouldn't be any poor.
No, Thompson, no. Just have a drink. Calm down.
Why not drink, boomer? Why don't you calm down? Just kidding. None of these guys were boomers. It was the 1800s. Thomson's proposal wasn't really to redistribute anything, because redistributing required taking stuff away from people, and his utilitarian heart really didn't vibe with that, so instead he proposed a system in which things were just, distributed right the first time. Not capitalism, not market socialism, not even big Bellamy-esque socialism. Small socialism, communities. He wanted it to be centralized to the degree that it helped, and decentralized to the degree that it didn't. What did it look like? Well, it kind of looked like federalism, kind of like egalitarianism, and kind of like socialism. He proposed, as the authors of my favorite econ textbook, Hunt and Lotzenheiser, summarized, a
planned cooperative socialist society. Such a society would consist of mutually coordinated, self-governing cooperative communities, each having from 500 to 2,000 members. In such communities, people could freely get the necessities of life from a common store. Children would be cared for, communally, and sleep in common dormitories, while adults would live in small apartments. There would be common kitchen facilities for everyone. There would be no sexual division of labor. Cooking, child-rearing, and other forms of women's drudgery would be shared by everyone on a rotational basis. All persons would become skilled in a variety of occupations and would regularly alternate employments to eliminate the monotony of work. Every adult member of each community would participate regularly in the necessary coordinating of governing bodies. The finest education would be freely available to everyone. Absolute political, intellectual, and religious freedom would be guaranteed. And finally, all wealth would be communally controlled and shared so that no individuous distinctions could result from the distribution of material wealth.
Your children are cared for. You are free to do whatever work you choose. Your voice matters in politics. Poverty is dead. Your friends are nearby. Life is good. And now, one more time, let's try the Goblin test. Thompson's idea, while delightful, isn't as meticulously thought out as the others, and positions of power aren't as well defined, so we'll just try to flesh it out as we go. Scenario 1. The Goblin is on the council that plans these socialist pods. What can he do? Can he cut off food production? Well, no, each pod has their own food supply. Presumably there's some trade between pods, but by Thompson's model it shouldn't be enough that the lack thereof would kill the society. Alright, can he poison the water? Again, each pod has its own water infrastructure. They aren't centralized around any one plant. The pods can interact, maybe they share some infrastructure, but this sharing is a luxury. At the end of the day, they maintain the means to make their own stuff. Can he change this? Force all the pods to depend on something and then turn it against them? That depends. Can he speak to, convince the majority of each pod in the country that it's in their best interest and in the best interest of the whole for them to lean on a centralized resource? Each pod has its own political leader, its own government, and its own culture. Can he get the majority on his side? Not clear. Sure, he could probably get some of them to depend on him, and maybe within his lifetime he can accumulate this trust and then use it to poison them. But then, what's to stop the pods that didn't buy into this plan from supporting their fallen neighbors? Why would the network not heal itself? The Goblin would have a lot of work to do, because not only does he have to gain control over the life necessities of the vast majority of self-governing pods in the country, he would also have to stop them from producing more of these necessities to restock. Because, remember, they're all self-sufficient. Also, keep in mind that based on Thompson's ideal size, and given the current population of the United States, we would have over 300,000 pods. That's a lot of charisma, man, a lot to get done in however long this dude's rotational term limit is. For now, I would say the game stays running. Scenario 2. The Goblin is an inventor. He creates an invention that everyone likes, something that spreads throughout the pods. It's a device, a smartphone, something like that. Maybe they're full of poison, maybe he can detonate them all at once, maybe they're radioactive. Except, can he do all this stuff by himself? Where is he getting the materials to make these weapons? From a community? A pod laboratory? He's dependent on others within the community. Import the materials? Okay, from where? Let's say the pods lightly specialize. Each produces their own necessities, but some branch out into tech manufacturing, some are known as hotspots for art or music, some tend to produce more films, whatever. So okay, he joins one of the techie pods and starts working there, and pulls a Steve Jobs-esque galaxy brain move, creates something that everyone can use that goes global almost instantly. But, how? It's not like one pod can manufacture all the smartphones. They're too small. The pods, not the phones. Also, not clear that patenting exists in this society to the degree that it does in our own. The tech pod can design this hip new thing, but as far as distributing them, it would be difficult, unnecessary, and not really in line with the values of the society to become the sole hub for creating them. Instead, this pod could distribute instructions for creating them, distribute the means to make these devices, which means the Goblin can't maintain control over all of them. He must be transparent about how to create them if he wants to distribute them. He can't bake in a secret harmful feature. People would have to know how to make it. Again, the system prevails. So, what have we learned? This system is spacey. It's not fully explained. We don't exactly know how it would be enforced, how it would perpetuate itself. But if it could, it has the potential to pass the Goblin test. And that at least puts it on my radar. Another thing Thompson talked about was nonviolent transition. He believed in this system, he did. But he also believed that it would come about peacefully, that people would eventually choose it, without fighting, without conquering, and without a big Marxist revolution. He wanted it to be chosen by the members of society, not for them by a larger entity. And I'm inclined to agree. We have to dream up the right system, test it, break it, fix it, but if we can do it right, if we can make one worth pitching to everyone in the world, we might just be able to get there without a fight.